Hi, everybody. I'm back. I hope you had some good breakout conversations. I really hope you got one of the delicious tarts outside. The chocolate ones were excellent. You're probably at the point now where you want to sit back and absorb a bit. There's a lot to process. We've been thinking a lot about AI. Our brains are tired, but still hungering for more knowledge. So we are going to take this opportunity now to learn a bit more about our brains. So it's my privilege to introduce our two pop-up provocations. Our first speaker is Paul Nuyujukian, who's an assistant professor of bioengineering and neurosurgery. So he is going to be telling us about some pretty cutting-edge stuff at the intersection of AI and real human brains. Paul. Oh, and Paul, I don't know if you were here earlier, but everyone has to give me a fist bump when they come up.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the welcome and the opportunity to speak. My name is Paul Nuyujukian. I'm an assistant professor in the departments of bioengineering, neurosurgery with a courtesy and double E here. I'm an MD, PhD. I do both large animal studies in systems neuroscience and neuroengineering, as well as human clinical studies with the common theme of trying to understand how the brain works, what goes wrong in the setting of disease, and how we might build therapies that are very data heavy to advance the state of the art for brain disease and various neuroscience problems. Our particular areas of interest are in spaces like stroke and epilepsy. And just to give you a context and sort of a sense of what that work looks like, let's bring up the display. On the clinical side, we record from people that have intractable epilepsy. These are individuals that have gone through the full gamut of treatments, and the meds aren't working. And so what they need is their next step is to go to some type of surgical intervention to help treat the epilepsy and the chronic seizures that are either going to stand in their way if they're children from developing, or are going to significantly minimize their quality of life. These individuals, often have numerous seizures every single day that are uncontrolled by medicine, so they're looking for interventions. Before you can go in as a neurosurgeon and just sort of take out random parts of the brain to say, yeah, maybe it's over here, you want a little bit more insight as to whether or not that's the region that might be the offending area where the seizures are occurring from. But to do that, you need to figure it out and localize the seizures and the origin of the seizures to do so. And in large academic institutions where they have the resources and the expertise to do this, there's a small number of them across the country that can do this. They actually bring these patients into the hospital. They keep them in there for about a week or two while they've implanted electrodes in their brain and study them over the next coming week or so to see if they can localize and understand where the seizures are coming from. They look something like this, right? They will put these pretty, large, millimeter-ish sort of electrodes deep into the brain and measure the contacts. And there's usually, anywhere from 10 to 20 of these across the brain while they're recording the activity of the brain over time. And these are sort of examples of the little squiggles that we get from these. These are not individual neurons. These are aggregate information of, say, hundreds of thousands or millions of neurons coming together to look at the local activity of that space. But it's informative enough to then figure out where the origin of the seizures is in many cases, which you then build a plan off of to treat and try to intervene, whether it's resection or some type of device that can go in to stimulate or intervene that origin space to treat those seizures and minimize the point of epilepsy. This is an extremely rare opportunity to get human neuroelectrophysiology data. We don't otherwise have an excuse to crack people's heads open, right, and instrument them with electrodes. It's a little unethical and invasive. And so it's important that as researchers, we take advantage of the clinical workflows and work as well as possible with the clinical teams so that we can get this type of data and use it for research purposes. And that's part of the things that our group has done for the last number of years, is actually build in infrastructure directly into the hospitals, both the adult and pediatric hospitals here, to pull that data in and be able to analyze it, perform tasks with individuals, and understand from a basic science standpoint not just what's going on with their brains for the purposes of epilepsy, but also just in general, how does the brain work? If you give them tasks or operations to do, what areas are lighting up, what's going on? Can we begin to peer into the brain to understand how it works? Very in a similar way that we would sort of do in our laboratory environments with our animals that we do on the animal side. This sort of effort was a pilot demonstration that led to a larger center that was recently launched called the Human Neurosurgery Program. And it's now this, this foundation at Stanford, which is really fun because we're now sort of expanding the set of researchers, expanding into other application spaces in neuroscience with a psychiatry focus now as well, in addition to just looking at epilepsy. To give you a sense of the scale of the data we're talking about, right? There was so much data being pulled out of this infrastructure that I had to go and actually build a new storage facility on campus. If you've heard of ELM, it was funded, designed by me, and funded by the Human Neurosurgery Program specifically to store the data that we were collecting. And it was, I can tell you all about it, I don't have them at the time, but the key is it stores lots of data in a very efficient way that undercuts even AWS Deep Glacier by a factor of 3. And it's fully on campus, and it, is S3 compatible. So you're just out there, right, dumping data into these object storage that look like buckets and doesn't even blink, and it's very effective and cheap. So if you are a Stanford researcher and you're not taking advantage of ELM, you should be. We have made it open and available to Stanford researchers at an amazing cost. So while we built it for our needs, we then said, this is useful. Let's let the rest of the university have access to it. This is just an example of one of the buckets I have. It's just sitting at around, a cool half a petabyte of storage for the different participants. And each of these, as you see, is a different participant that we've collected data from, right? Each of them represents a person who was in the hospital for a week or two with electrodes in their head. And that's the raw ePhys data from all of this. So just one glimpse into sort of what the neuroscience and the data sort of needs look like. They are, not enormous, not Slack level enormous, but still big enough that you need to have structure about how you go about them. So we're talking about education, right? We want to talk about how we tackle education in the setting of AI. The elephant in the room that many of you, if you're an educator, has been dealing with is how on earth am I going to design a curriculum, perform assessments, do any of these things when GPT whatever can just answer all of my questions in about 10 seconds. There's no possible way for us to, make this work anymore. Sure, that's one perspective. I will see that as an opportunity, and I will challenge the educators here to say that you need to start thinking about more clever ways of designing your curriculum and your assessments so that you can make it, GPT-proof. That sounds weird, but I think we're actually overestimating the capacity of these systems. At the end of the day, they're just a machine learning model, right? They're just a transformer model. They're just a supervised learning system an unsupervised learning system, my apologies, specifically, that is simply, right, making patterns out of the structure that's been given. It has no actual intention, has no actual goal. It doesn't know anything. It's just finding structure. And that was an interesting opportunity. This is a portal of my class that's being offered right now. In fact, it's being offered right now, and I'm not at my class because my TAs are covering, so I can give this talk. And here's the homework for Module 3. Bunch of stuff. I built an LTI integration for this that's hosted off of Google Cloud. Happy to talk about it later if anyone's interested. But let's pick a random question. 36A, let's pick a longer question. 30-something, I don't know. Okay, here's one, 33B, airplane ear. So we're looking at modeling the brain, modeling the inner ear using mathematics, and you can copy and it's this big old thing to write. I said, let's see how well the modern GPTs can answer these questions, because historically it's been terrible. And so I took, I think, this question in, and I dumped it into AI Playground. If you don't know about AI Playground, it's a phenomenal resource that UIT now manages, which gives you access to all of the various GPT whatevers, sonnets, this, that, from Anthropic and everything, just sort of at your fingertips in a pseudo-confidential way. And I just dumped in my question, and it tried to answer it. It looks interesting, it looks comprehensive, it's utter garbage, right? This thing is hopeless at actually understanding and providing insight in a sensible way to structured, nuanced questions where it requires multiple steps for you to piece together and figure it out. Yeah, it can answer lookup questions very easily. I think the days of us testing on sheer rote sort of knowledge in a homework question is probably over, because it's probably been over for a while. Google has done that a long time ago. But these more delicate questions about synthesis, analysis, and integrating, especially with coding that has to be done so that you can answer the question in a layered and multi-stage framework, these are the things that these tools are effectively useless for. But the beautiful thing is that's the intuition you actually want to impart in your classroom. And so I would challenge the educators to think about trying to distill down to the essence of what it is you're trying to communicate to your students, what you want them to learn, and build the curriculum in a way and the assessments in a way that force them to pick those elements out that are just not surface level conclusions that are at the points of these models. It's just the new calculator, right? We don't really test very heavily on 5-digit multiplication anymore in academics, in elementary school. Why? Because once you get the first couple ones and the principles done, the rest is just tedious extension, and the calculator does it for you. This is just the new calculator, and in my opinion, we got to get behind it. There's no other answer, if in my opinion. So, last couple things I will leave you with in the last 2 minutes that I have is, if this is an approach, what are the opportunities moving forward? Right? This is a burden on the educators. We have to deal with that. I get it. But where can these tools be useful for us in our research and our education spaces? And what I will point you to is this resource, which is llm.stanford.edu. This is a page that I run. I've been managing it since I put it up, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so. This was the first public, well, not public, but campus-wide available general LLM that was PHI approved, fully confidential, fully anonymous. This top thing doesn't work anymore. I have to update it, like broken last week or so, because the general LLMs are outdated. But the key is, and that was fun because you could ask it questions that were PHI approved, and I promised like not to sell it anywhere or train any models, so it was actually something you could use back before that was really easy. AI Playground has mostly supplanted this, except for the PHI component, and Med PHI has the Med PHI LLMs have mostly taken care of that. So this is effectively not that critical at the top level anymore, but I have it there for historical purposes. This bottom section is where I really want to draw your attention to, because this is where I think the real opportunities are. We can now at fingertips build models that are augmented and grounded against existing bases of knowledge that are specific to the question that you might be trying to ask or answer. What do I mean by this? Let's say that you are trying to figure out stuff at Stanford. You want to know certain policies, and you have reams and reams of pages to dig through. Here's a model that just goes through and scours every single documented sort of thing I could find at Stanford, policy page, whatever, and gives you a model where you can just sit there and ask it questions. What is the maternity leave policy at Stanford? You ask the question, it spits out the answer, and more importantly, because these things hallucinate like crazy, is it links to the resource that it found that answer in so that you can verify the question yourself. You don't have to take anything for granted. This is where the possibilities really matter. These things are not trustworthy. You have to find the source. And the key is, it's all about curating the sources. And this technology, this idea, this concept of a well-curated set of information that is now indexable, searchable, and parsable naturally by you, queryable in an easy way, I think is going to transform the way we think about education and research. Let me give you 2 more examples. I've done the same thing, but for motor systems neuroscience, my particular space of interest, right? I gave it a bunch of PDFs from my field, journal content, whatnot, that I trust, that I know, papers that I have read myself and said, these are papers that matter. And you can now effectively query my bibliography and ask it questions about my field based on papers that I trust. So you could say something like, why did the tuning model fall out of favor? And this was a very popular model of explaining motor control back in the 80s. And suddenly, right, you've got a bunch of answers with papers that are anchored to this conclusion. So you can go and read the fundamental papers that changed these opinions. And the final thing, I know I'm over time, my apologies. One last thing for the educators, right, not the researchers, is you can do the same thing for your courses. I give 2 guest lectures for MBio 206 on the motor system. But it's a big course on the neurobiology, on neuroscience and neurobiology. I have uploaded the entire course reader and everything I could find associated with that course to this thing. I said, index it all. And you can just sit there and be like, what is an alpha motor neuron? Ask the question, and sure enough, it'll give you the answer and the exact chapters and sections of the PDFs of the reader where it finds that answer so you can answer it. What I noticed, and because I can just watch the sort of activity of this, activity on this site sort of exploded in the days leading up to the exam for the course. Not surprising. But again, it shows that students are actively engaging with this type of indexing and search process for their education. These are the types of things I think we need to start thinking about and embrace, because I think the value is in curating the content from experts and then making that available for others to learn off of in probably a very different model of education than we're used to before. All right, I will stop there. My apologies for going over.